Hey guys, thanks for joining me in this paint along video. My name is Makenzie from the Harrisburg District Library. Here's how this video works. Grab your paint and paintbrushes and feel free to follow along as we go step by step with this painting. We're going to base it off of this picture, and hopefully it'll end up looking something like this. Feel free to pause the video at any time to get caught up, and feel free to add your own flair, maybe adding or changing something. Whatever it is, make it your own and have fun. Our photo inspiration for this painting video was taken from a photographer on unsplash.com. Before we sketch, we'll want to tape down our watercolor paper with some masking tape or painter's tape. This will hold it in place while we paint, and it'll give it a nice border. Sketch lightly with your pencil, just drawing basic outlines of shapes. We'll fill in details later. If you press too hard with your pencil, it will scar and damage the paper, making it impossible to completely erase your lines. The pencil lines shouldn't be visible after we paint layers over them, so don't worry if it looks a little messy. Let's start painting. The first color we'll use is a mixture of pink and orange, giving us a nice contrast for our sunset. As you go up further into the sky, the color isn't as strong, so to lighten it, feel free to water down your paint until it's more translucent. Remember, watercolor is all about adding layers of color. Slowly work the paint up the page, adding more water as you go. Go ahead and add water to the remaining part of the sky area. Then mix a tiny bit of blue with a tiny bit of gray. Total white doesn't exist in nature, so even the slightest bit of color will make a difference. Now add a little bit of green as the base for our background. Not much of it is going to shine through. We're mostly going to build off of it, but you have to start somewhere. We'll also add a little bit of green for our embankment in the foreground. Working on different parts at a time that aren't touching will help you in the long run, so the colors don't end up bleeding together while your paint is still wet. So at this point, I accidentally dripped some paint on my page. Uh-oh. This happened because I had way too much water in my brush. I was gonna paint that area blue anyway, but if you get paint in an area where you don't want it to be, take a wet paper towel or cloth and gently dab it until it goes away. Unfortunately, I did this a couple of times actually. I was able to get it cleaned up pretty good, but if it ends up staining your paper, don't worry about it. That's part of the fun of watercolor. It does whatever it wants, and you just kind of have to work with it. So we're going to use the same technique that we used on the sunset. Just add a little bit of color, and then try to fade it down if you can by adding water at the bottom. So next I made a dark blue-gray just from mixing in a little bit of black into my blue. And I added it to the top of my mountains, and then I worked it down gently, adding a little bit of water as I went so it would fade into the other blue. While we wait for this layer to dry, let's add that blue-gray down to our water. Looking at the photo reference, there's a little bit of orange in the center that's reflecting from the sunset. So try to transition from the blue-gray to the orange to the blue-gray again. You can do this by using a lot of water and just barely adding pigment as you go. You can always darken it later, but you don't want to start out too dark in the beginning. If you have to add more color, try to do it while it's still wet, that way it will blend through more thoroughly. So let's add another layer of the dark blue to the mountaintops. Each time we do this, we're adding a little more depth to the background. The goal is the top edge of the mountain should be the darkest point. They should gradually fade and look foggy below. Each time we do this, we want the color to stop at a higher and higher level to create a gradient. While that dries, let's work on the water. We're going to try darkening the left and right sides of the water, and leave some spaces for rocks. This layer is just really watered down black, which I continue to add water to so that it becomes more of a translucent gray as it gets towards the center. If you feel like you've gone too dark in an area, try to act quickly while the paint is still wet. Water it down and try dabbing it with a damp cloth or paper towel. You should be able to draw some of the paint out with this technique, but also keep in mind that once the layers dry, they may not be as dark as you think. We still have some more layers to add to this, so don't worry if it looks a little weird. Watercolor is very progressive. Here's something that might prove helpful to you during this painting. It can be hard to find the right shade of whatever color you're working with, so you can try testing it out on an extra piece of watercolor paper if you have it. That way there's no uh-oh moment when you realize you've used the wrong shade. We're going to add an even darker blue to the mountain that's closest to the viewer. Again, try to make a gradient as you work the color down. Mixing some blue and green, try to make a teal color for our trees that are in the background. While the paint's still wet, you can feather the pooled paint and make it look more like trees in the distance. The bottoms of these trees are not visible, so just have the color fade down. Go ahead and repeat this technique across the page. It might be beneficial to use a thicker brush to glob the paint on, and then use a smaller brush or even a fine point brush to feather the edges out. Go ahead and bring that color down to the green strip that we did earlier. Keep the left side a little lighter though. We're also going to darken the orange in the center of our water so it has a stronger contrast. Make sure you water down the edges of this new addition so that you can blend them thoroughly into the other color. The water was looking a little too gray, so I went ahead and added a little more blue to the sides. Remember, your painting doesn't have to be an exact replica of mine. You're welcome to use creative license to do whatever else you would like. You can add something in the distance or maybe add a different color. It's up to you, however you want it to look. If you've been painting along, take a moment to reflect on your picture. It should look similar to this. If not, make needed adjustments. Next, I've mixed brown, green, and black to make a hunter green for the evergreen trees that are the next layer. Go ahead and blend that color down because there are smaller trees in front of the evergreens. We also want to go back to the teal color and add a little bit of black to darken it for the next layer of evergreens in the back. Be sure to feather the trees just as you did before. Let's go back to the water. Using a watered down black paint, go ahead and add some stones along the edge of our embankment. We want some to be jutting out in different sizes and different locations. Try to make some of the bigger stones and the stones that are closest to the foreground a little lighter. That way you can go back and add shading and details to them. Here I'm adding just a few touch-ups. Feel free to go back through and tweak your painting as necessary. I also added some details to the mountains in the background. I darkened the edges just a little bit and I blended them in. Now's a good time to go back and add some shading to the stones in the water. Using a dark brown, add some tree trunks in the background. If they're lighter, they'll look like they're further in the distance. You're doing great so far. Keep up the good work. Now we're going to work on the front embankment. We're going to use a fine point brush to do lots and lots of little brush strokes, which might be a little intimidating, but don't worry, we're going to break it up. We're going to be working on the underside of the grass, so we want to use the darkest green that we have, and then taper it up as you go, adding a little bit of water so that it blends upwards and makes a lighter color. This will give us a good transition as the shadows fade. You'll want to use a little bit of the original light green color for the highlights, so don't completely cover it. Remember, to actually make the blades of grass, we're going to use negative space, filling in the edges around the grass with the darker color. Try to make little bundles of grass. It should be shooting out from one direction, maybe off to the side or outward like hair growing out of your scalp. As you go, you can darken the bottom shadowy areas by adding just a little bit of black. This will give you a full range of distinct shades of green. After you finish this part, feel free to take a break. You deserve it. Next, we're going to add a little more foliage in the background. Use swooping strokes to make some of the bushes. You can add a little bit of black to the green as you mix it in and make little layers of the bush. While that dries, I'm also going to add another layer to the back mountain, and I'm going to start on the grass here at the other side of the embankment. Don't worry, it won't be as complicated as the other grass was. Here I'm using a green that has a little more yellow in it, so it's got a brighter reflection, and then again I'm adding darker green below it, and a darker background behind it. That way it really pops at the top. I'm also adding some more bushes and different shrubbery in the background, and I'm using black very tastefully as I go through and just add it to the bottom so that there's some shadow there. You can get a wide variety of just experimenting with different colors and textures, adding more or less water. It'll make a difference and it'll give you some diversity. We are almost done, so don't give up yet. While that's drying, let's work a little more on the water, maybe darkening the sides of it, using the translucent gray color just to add some ripples. Have fun with it, just go crazy. I'm adding some shading to my rocks and a little shadow behind it as the water flows around it. But make sure that you also leave the center of the water a little lighter. I'm also touching up my grass, adding some lines here and there, some shadows, just so that it's not just big blobs of color. You want to make sure that you add some texture to it and give it some structure. And at this point, all you really need is your signature in the bottom corner. We should be done. Now it's time for the most satisfying part of the art project, removing the strips of tape off the sides. This should leave a nice bright white border that is a natural mat for your painting. You want to take the tape off carefully and slowly and at an angle, that way it doesn't tear up your painting. Hopefully it created a nice strong seal so it didn't leak through. You might notice the tape catching part of your paper. You don't want to tear it off. Try peeling it off in the other direction, that way you don't have it shredding your paper, and then you shouldn't be able to tell too much that it did tear it. You can see here I was able to just pull it off from the other side and then just remove the extra paper. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me today, and hopefully this is just step one in your artistic journey. If you enjoyed this video or there's something else you'd like to learn, let us know in the comments below. We'll see you next time. Until then, happy painting!